Hello everyone, welcome back to Sunday School. Okay, so for our lesson today, we'll be focusing on the greatest commandment. Greatest meaning the best or kind of like the most important. And commandment is just another way of saying basically a rule. So when we're talking about the greatest commandment, one of the things that comes to mind is the 10 commandments, right? We had a song about that kind of a while back, so I think I might link that in at the bottom of our lesson here, so hopefully you guys can sing that song and learn what some of those commandments are. But on top of the 10 commandments that people had to follow, the Jewish people also had 613 rules spelled out. They had to follow to the letter, or they would get into trouble. Now, some of those rules were a little bit odd. Like one of the rules that they had to follow is that they couldn't wear pieces of clothing that were two different types of cloth. So right now I'm wearing this orange sweater that's made out of wool, but I'm also wearing a pair of jeans which are made out of denim and cotton. So if I was to follow those rules, the 613 rules that are in the Torah, technically, I would be breaking a rule, and God would be upset with me if I followed that ideology. Now, do we really think that God would be upset about the fact that I'm wearing cloth of two different colors in my body today? No. So, a lot of people were kind of upset by that thinking when Jesus first started to bring it about. And there's one story in particular where some people try to trip Jesus up with these rules. Now, Jesus did a lot of his teachings in some things called synagogues or like places of holy worship where people would gather and learn together. Now, in this particular synagogue, there was two groups of people that would attend, Pharisees and I'm going to mess this up, and Sadducees. And these two types of people were neighbors, and they really did not get along. They weren't like fighting with each other every single day, but definitely there was not good feelings between the two. Now, the group of Pharisees said that when they saw Jesus coming, they're like, we're going to trip him up. We are going to catch him in the act. He cannot be who he says he is. He does not know all of the rules, which means he's wrong. So they said, we are going to put a test to Jesus to see if we can catch him and prove that he's not who he says he is. So now remember, there was at least 613 laws, and it could take people their whole lives to memorize all these laws. So it's kind of a hard task they've set in front of Jesus. So these people start to test, and they start to ask him all of these different questions. What is this law? What about that law? Do you know this one? Is this true? Is this false? Is this right? Is this wrong? And Jesus pretty much puts a stop to this. He says, stop. Now, why laws are important, there's the greatest commandment that we need to follow. And if you can follow this, then you are following all of the other rules that God has put before us to follow. And he says, rule number 1, you should pretty much put God first in your life, meaning that you should put God into your soul, into your mind, in your body, and you should kind of think about how God would reflect on your actions while you're doing them. And 2, you should love your neighbor as yourself. And that was kind of like a racy thing to say at that time, or something that not a lot of people agreed with. Because a lot back then, and still today, people like us and them. They like putting things into groups. A lot of people do. And so these two people and these two neighbors that did not get along, it's kind of a hard thing for them to all of a sudden switch their mindset and be like, okay, well, I have to love my neighbor as much as I love myself. And Jesus said that if you can do those two things, you will follow all of the other rules that God has put before you. That's why it's called the greatest commandment. Now, why do you think those are the greatest commandments? Why is that the most important thing? To put God first and to love thy neighbor as yourself. Well, I really think what God in the church is all about really is bringing a community together to make the world a better place. So if you are doing actions that you know will make God proud or that you can be proud of, then you're doing something to better the world. And sometimes we can get so wrapped up in ourselves that it's hard to see that other people are struggling too. So by saying that you need to love your neighbor as yourself, God and Jesus are basically telling us to look outside of ourselves to see what needs to be done. That it can't always be about me, 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 me. Sometimes it needs to be about you, 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 you. It needs to be about other people in the world and making their lives better too. Because if one person is suffering, then we're all suffering because they're our neighbor and we should be loving them as ourselves. So he says that if you're reaching out to others and loving them and helping them, then you're helping yourself too, because your neighbor is part of you. They're part of your community, they're part of your lives, and when everybody is successful and thriving and happy, that means the world is a happier place too. Now, there are quite a few things in a lot of people in this story. There's Pharisees, Sadducees, Jesus, rules, laws, and it all can get very, very confusing. So I think kind of like the takeaway or the most important thing to focus about is our memory verse, which is to put God first in your mind, in your body, in your heart, in your soul, and to love thy neighbor as yourself. So I know that in children's conversation, I asked you to write a letter to your neighbor with your parents' permission. So the other thing that I want you to do this week is I want you to look at all of the rules that you have in your life and see which of those greatest commandments those rules follow. Do they fall under putting God first, or do they fall under loving thy neighbor as yourself? I bet you'll see that a lot of the rules that we have in our lives fall under loving thy neighbor as yourself or respecting their time and space. Like one of the big rules that I remember having having to follow all the time was quiet hours. Quiet hours is a thing that a lot of colleges have so that other people can sleep and study. And so by following that quiet time, those quiet hours, I'm showing love for my neighbor, for my people who need to sleep, and for the people that need to study. Because if they can't sleep or study, then they're going to be stressed out and worried. So I want you this week to write down all the rules that you have to follow that you can possibly think of, and then see if you can split them up into loving thy neighbor or putting God first. And I want you to see how those rules do that. And maybe if there's a rule that doesn't follow those, maybe we need to figure out how we can get that rule to fit into one of those two categories, okay? Alrighty, everyone. Well, I hope you have a fantastic Sunday. I'm so happy that fall is here, and I cannot wait until I'm finally able to see you guys again, okay? Alrighty, everyone. You have a great day. Bye-bye.